Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This session should last approximately 15 minutes, and there'll be time for questions to be answered at the end. If you can remain muted, please, during the session. It is being recorded and will be available on the training pages and our YouTube channel once it's been uploaded. If you do have any questions as we're going through the presentations, if you can ask those in the chat for me, and then we'll answer those at the end of the session. So today's webinar is on clinical safety, and during the session we're going to have a brief introduction to Surgery Connect's clinical safety from our Head of Research and Development, Derek Measham. We're going to be looking at how you can change the messages to patients and where those messages are found. We'll look at Xflow and changing the prompts and also the playlists within the Xflow system. But first of all, I'm going to hand over to Derek Measham, who is our Head of Research and Development, and he will take you through a brief presentation on clinical safety within Surgery Connect there.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Hopefully you can all see my screen there. So yeah, I'm just going to give some of the highlights around the sort of activities we're up to here at Exon Surgery Connect around our clinical safety system. It's called system because it's not just one or two things, it's a whole number of different activities that we're up to try and ensure that patient safety is at the core of everything we do. So the first one here is a fairly sort of standard roles and responsibilities matrix. Just gives you an idea of some of the activities that we're really focused on. You can see there, that's me with a lot of the red ones there. So I'm responsible for analysing a lot of the risks, deciding what we do about it, seeing how we can reduce that and getting that implemented. And there's a number of people there across the business that have different roles to play. But really, it's not just these people, it's all across Exon where we are really focused on getting awareness of clinical safety to ensure that Surgery Connect is the best and as safe as it can be. And then the key person for me really is our clinical safety officer at the end there. There's a guy called Dr. Jeff Schrecker. He's been part of our team now for a few years, and he's been great. He brings with him a whole wealth of experience on all things clinical safety, data, all sorts of information governance, and he's been really critical in us in setting this up and our sort of ongoing stance on clinical safety. So he's the one that has the final sign off, but is heavily involved in a lot of the discussions along the way. So the main headlines that make up our clinical safety system, we have our clinical risk management plan. And really that has the sort of key activities in there and details on our approach and really a process that we're sticking to, all about the clinical safety. And we have a standard incident reporting and logging. Again, these are all very standard things that we put in place. And our ongoing hazard log, I'm going to talk a bit more about that shortly. But really, to us as well, it doesn't stop there. So there's some of the main things that need to be in place for the DCB 0129 standard. But for us, there's plenty of other areas that fall into patient safety as well. There was a really good blog actually on the NHS digital website last week, about their stance that cybersecurity is a patient safety issue as well, and we couldn't agree more actually. So I'm mentioning some other areas here that we're up to that I think are important for clinical safety as well. So cybersecurity testing is very much part of what we do. We have annual penetration testing of our data centers. We've just undergone a very detailed look at our desktop application as well, which, pleased to say, has received a very clean bill of health. So that's good news. We maintain ISO 27001 and ISO 9001. Again, that's core to what we do. We submit to the NHS DSP toolkit, and there's plenty of different framework submissions that happen as well. And the framework submissions include everything that we just talked about and more. So that to me, that's a real good sort of checkpoint that we're on the right lines to ensuring the system's as safe as it can be. And then once we've done all that, we end up with a final clinical safety case report, and our stance on 0129 compliance. So just a quick one on the hazard log. So we just take the standard NHS digital format. That's all supplies for us. And it's very much an ongoing live document and process that we're in all the time. So yeah, one of my main hats is looking after the product development here at Exon, and it's very much ongoing development. So clinical safety is very much part of that process, the ongoing nature, always looking at it. So in our hazard log at the moment, we've reduced everything to mostly level 1 hazards, which is acceptable and no further action required. There are a couple of level 2s where the sort of official definition is there, but it's really that the benefits of using the system far outweigh the risks involved, or the potential risks and likelihood of those risks. So it's exactly where we want to be, and having everything as controlled as it can be, and increasing awareness to reduce that even further. So all of the hazards that we've identified are controlled and closed, and some are transferred, and that's transferred to our customers, and that's some of the things that James is going to go on to talk about in terms of Xflow setup and some of the prompts that you could and should be putting in place. And then really, because we're always developing Surgery Connect, it's an ongoing software development project. We've just got a fairly standard software development lifecycle diagram there. We're constantly going round and evaluating clinical safety is, again, very much part of the process. So any new developments have a stage where we think about the potential risks, and they're discussed, and we change our product development off the back of those discussions. But just as an example, one at the moment, we're looking at appointment management over the telephone. And yeah, there's lots of discussions there, particularly around appointment cancellation, actually, and what we can do to reduce the risks around that. Then what we finally end up with is our safety case report, which we do on an annual basis after all this activity. And then we end up with a very nice statement from our point of view. Surgery Connect is compliant with DCB 0129 and is clinically safe. So yep, just to reiterate, it's very important to us, and it's very much an ongoing process. So I'm going to hand back to James now, who's going to discuss some of the detail around Xflow setup. Thank you.
That's super. Thanks very much, Derek, for that. So one of the things that came out of our clinical safety was the messages that we can give to patients through the call flow. So all the messages and actions for Surgery Connect can be changed in the call flow to suit the surgery, and that can all be controlled through Xflow on the system. There's various places where messages are given out to patients, and the first one that we recommend that you review is your welcome prompt, which will be the green prompt block right at the beginning of the call flow there. There are also menu prompts, so obviously you can look at the menu options. This is probably quite a good time to do a review of your call flow and just make sure it's doing exactly what you want it to do, and make any changes that you need to as you go through. You'll also find playlists within the various group blocks, so there'll be the dark orange blocks that you'll see within the call flow, and the playlist is what the patients are listening to whilst they queue. So normally that will give them their queue position and play them some music. However, you can add in messages to those playlists, and we have done a webinar called Informing Your Patients, which will go through changing those playlists in detail there for you. Some practices may notice that they have light blue boxes just before one of their groups, and that will actually change the whisper and the playlist depending on what the patient has chosen within any menu, if you've got one team answering all of those calls. So if you've got your system set up with a standard reception team and all of your calls go into that team, you can still use menus and change the whispers that the team hear when the call's presented, so they know what the call should be about, and also change the playlist that the patient's listening to whilst they queue for that particular query. So all of these options are changed in Xflow, and Xflow can be accessed from various places. The easiest place to go to Xflow from is probably the service delivery console. So if you're in there in the numbers section, you'll have a list of all the numbers and call flows set up for the practice, and you can click on the blue edit icon and it will take you straight into Xflow and load that call flow up for you. If you're accessing from the single sign-on, then obviously you have Xflow down at the bottom right-hand side there, and you can also access it via the menu, which is the 3 lines just next to your initials at the top of all of the consoles. That will then give you access to the other consoles that you have. You can access, and you can use Xflow just down at the bottom of that list. Now, if you've gone through the single sign-on or the menu, the first thing that you're going to need to do when you open Xflow is actually load up the call flow that you want to view. So there will be a load icon just at the top left-hand side of the screen, and down at the bottom right, you'll also have the little magnifying glass for our online help centre. So don't forget, you've got step-by-step guides that you can search for through the help centre there, and we looked at that on our last webinar. So clicking on load at the top left-hand side of Xflow will then give you a list of all the call flows that you have set up. You can either search via the telephone number or scroll through the names of the call flows. So we're looking really for the one that's going to be your main number call flow. When you've selected that in the list, just click on load down at the bottom of that pop-up, and that will then load the call flow that you've requested on the screen for you. So within Xflow, you're going to have the name up at the top. You've got some functions across the top of the screen here. And then down the left-hand side, we have all the icons that we can drag and drop onto the workspace to create new blocks. You'll also see a graphical representation of your call flow, and all the prompt boxes are the ones in green, and those are the ones that you can change the messages in. Through the clinical safety review, within the welcome prompts from the 8th of September, we've now included a message that once it answers the call and gives the practice name, it obviously tells everybody that the calls are going to be recorded, and also we've now added in to the standard script that if the patient is suffering from chest pains or having difficulty breathing, they should hang up immediately and dial 999. Now, any call flows that were created before the 8th of September won't have those messages in. So if you'd like to update the messages, open up your main number call flow and then double click on the prompt that you want to change. So initially, that will probably be the welcome prompt, which is answering the calls into the practice. Double clicking on the coloured bar at the top of the prompt box will open up the prompt properties. You can change the name, obviously, the description, and whether the patient can skip this message. So in the most part, within any of your green prompt boxes, you want to make sure that that can interrupt is set to no, so that the patient doesn't accidentally hit a button and play a tone and then skip this part of the call flow. On the audio tab up at the top, will then give you access to what the system is saying at the moment. So this is from our training database, but the actions that you'll need to take will be exactly the same. So we can see here at the moment that we're using text to speech so that we don't have to record our own messages. We've selected Amy as the prompt voice here, and then in the prompt text box is what the system's going to say. So you can change that text, and that's then what will be read out. Any changes that you do make, save to the test number that goes alongside your main practice number first. So even if the practice is open and patients are actually using the phone system to call in at the moment, you can change these messages without initially changing what the patient hears here. So just by typing in the new text that you want to use, so in here we've changed it now to the name of the practice, the call recording message, and our clinical safety message. So if you're experiencing chest pains or having difficulty breathing, please hang up immediately and dial 999. Don't forget to preview the text just to make sure that it's being read out in exactly the same the way that you expect. And then if you click on save down at the bottom, that will then save that new text to the test number on the system. Up at the top of the screen, you'll then see a big orange banner that says that you're currently viewing an undeployed version. So that means that what's on the test number is different than what's on the number that the patients are currently using. To change that, just click on the deploy button and that will then swap those changes over onto your main number and become then the messages that the patients are hearing whenever they ring in to the practice. So that's changing our welcome prompt to include that message. Also, as part of that clinical safety review, we've added a similar message into the playlist within the group itself. So you can see the group here, which is our orange appointments block. And if I double click on the appointments block here, I can then access the playlist through that group block. If you have a group behavior block, which is the light blue one, then that's where you will need to change the playlist for that particular option. I'm going to click on the appointments group here though, and that will then open up the group properties. I now have my playlist and patient callback options, so I can just click on the playlist option at the top, and that will then open up the playlist. As a default, the majority of them will be set on playlist 1, which is your cue position and then music, and it will repeat that information until the call reaches the front of the queue. If you've made any amendments to that playlist and saved it as playlist 1, obviously it will then show you the playlist that you want to see. So there is an edit button, and if you click on edit selected playlist, it will then open up a new window with the playlist in here as it stands at the moment. So this is our cue position and then the music, and then it repeats that information until the call is answered. So to add in an extra prompt to the playlist, you can take the prompt from the left hand side and just drag and drop it over onto the workspace. That will then create a single prompt. You can then double click into the prompt and click on the audio tab, just like we did before, to change the audio. On this one, I'm also going to change the name, so I'm going to call it the clinical safety prompt, and obviously make sure that can interrupt is set to no, so that the patients can't skip this whilst they're listening and waiting in the queue. Clicking on the audio tab will bring up exactly the same options as we had in the welcome prompt. So we're on text to speech. I can change the voice if I need to, and then I can enter the prompt text that I want to use within the playlist. Now the playlist standard text that we're adding in is that we will answer your call as soon as possible. If you're experiencing chest pains or having difficulty breathing, please hang up immediately and call 999. Otherwise, please continue to hold. It will then play the music, and then it's going to repeat that information. So again, remember to preview whatever you've typed in there just to make sure it is reading out exactly what you want it to say, and then click on save down at the bottom to save that prompt box. If you've changed the name, that will then rename it on the screen, and it's now added that text in. All we need to do now is to add that into the actual flow. So if you click on the blue lines that link up any of the blocks, you can actually delete those and then rearrange the blocks and the flow so it does what you want in the order that you want to do it. So just clicking on the lines here will turn them red. Now I've actually used my shift button on my keyboard and clicked 2 lines at once here so that they've both gone red, and then just clicking delete on my keyboard will then delete those connections. I can then move the blocks around using drag and drop. So I've moved the music so that they get the cue position and then the clinical safety message and then the music afterwards. And then we can just rejoin the dots from the next option up to the front of the next block that you want to play. Once you've reconnected all the dots, obviously from the last one, you're just going to go right back round to the beginning of the cue position, and that will then set up a new playlist for you. Obviously, this is quite clear to see. If you've got quite a few cue reassurance prompts in there, then you can use auto arrange here just to arrange it on the screen if you need to, and it will then rearrange the block so it's easy to read there for you. Now, if you do save as new down at the bottom, that will then give you the option to add a new name to this playlist so that you can name the playlist something specific and keep playlist 1 for any of the cues that you don't want to add in that clinical safety message to. When you've changed the name, just click on save, and that playlist will then appear as the playlist for that particular group or in that group behavior if you've changed it through the light blue blocks there. Now you can change that playlist on each of the groups that you have set up. So any of the orange blocks can have a different playlist, so you can put in different information if a patient is queuing for appointments than you would if they were queuing for test results or if they were queuing for something like prescription queries. Once you've got the playlist showing as the playlist that's set, you can then click on Save. And that will then save the new playlist for that particular group, so that any calls that join it then will hear the new playlist once that playlist has been deployed. So even though we haven't actually made changes to any settings, because we've changed the message in the playlist there, we would still need to deploy that call flow so that that then becomes the messages that the patients are hearing when they're queuing for us in our appointments queue here. So we've had a look there at changing both the prompt and the playlist within the group or the group behavior blocks. So during this session, we've had that introduction to the SurgeryConnect clinical safety system from Derek. We've had a look at where you can change the various messages to the patients, how to access Xflow, how to edit your welcome prompt specifically, and how to edit the playlist to add in that clinical safety information.